माइक रखिए। कुंज विहारी जय गोपी यशोदनन्दना व्रज जनरञ्जना यमुनातीरवनचारिणी यमुनातीरवनचारिणी जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारी जय गोपी वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदनन्दन व्रज जनरञ्जना यमुनातीरवनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारी जय राधा वृंदावन चंद्र राधा वृंदावन चंद्र राधे जय निताय गौरांग निताय गौरांग जय निताय गौरांग जय जय प्रभुपाद जय श्रीला प्रभु। जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर श्री श्रीमद् डिवाइन ग्रेस अभय चरणारविंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की गौर प्रेमानंदे। Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevayam Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Reading from Shrimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 3, Text 33. Yatre me sadasadrupe Yatre me sadasadrupe Yatre me sadasadrupe Pratishidde Swasambhida Pratishidde Swasambhida Pratishidde Swasambhida Avidyayatmani Avidyayatmani Krite Avidyayatmani Krite Avidyayatmani Krite Iti Tad Brahmadarshanam Iti Tad Brahmadarshanam Iti Tad Brahmadarshanam Yatre me sadasadrupe Pratishidde swasambhida Avidyayatmani krite Iti tad brahmadarshanam Yatre me sadasadrupe Pratishidde swasambhida Avidyayatmani krite Iti tad brahmadarshanam Yatre me sadasadrupe Pratishidde swasambhida Avidyayatmani krite Iti tad brahmadarshanam Yatre me sadasadrupe Pratishidde swasambhida Avidyayatmani krite Iti tad brahmadarshanam Yatre me sadasadrupe Pratishidde swasambhida Avidyayatmani krite Iti tad brahmadarshanam Yatre me sadasadrupe Sambhida Avidyayatmani krite Iti tad brahmadarshanam. Synonyms: Yatra, whenever, ime, in all these, sadasat, gross and subtle, rupe, in the forms of, pratishidde, on being nullified, swasambhida, by self-realization, avidyaya, by ignorance, atmani, in the self, krite, having been imposed, iti, thus, tat, that is, Brahma Darshanam, the process of seeing the Absolute. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Charanarvinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation: whenever a person experiences by self-realization that both the gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self, at that time he sees himself as well as the Lord. Translation with repetition: whenever a person experiences by self-realization that both the gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self, at that time he sees himself as well as the Lord. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The difference between self-realization and material illusion is to know that the temporary or illusory impositions of material energy in the shape of gross and subtle bodies are superficial coverings of the self. The coverings take place due to ignorance. Such coverings are never effective in the person of the personality of Godhead. Knowing this convincingly is called liberation, or seeing the Absolute. This means that perfect self-realization is made possible by adoption of godly or spiritual life. Self-realization means becoming indifferent to the needs of the gross and subtle bodies and becoming serious about the activities of the self. The impetus for activities is generated from the self, but such activities become illusory due to ignorance of the real position of the self. By ignorance, self-interest is calculated in terms of the gross and subtle bodies, and therefore a whole set of activities is spoiled life after life. When, however, one meets the self by proper culture, the activities of the self begin. Therefore, a man who is engaged in the activities of the self is called Jivan Mukta, or a liberated person, even in the conditional existence. This perfect stage of self-realization is attained not by artificial means, but under the lotus feet of the Lord, who is always transcendental. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that He is present in everyone's heart, and from Him only all knowledge, remembrance, or forgetfulness takes place. When the living being desires to be an enjoyer of material energy, illusory phenomena, the Lord covers the living entity in the mystery of forgetfulness. And thus, the living being misinterprets the gross body and subtle mind to be his own self. And by culture of transcendental knowledge, when the living being prays to the Lord for deliverance from the clutches of forgetfulness, the Lord, by His causeless mercy, removes the living being's illusory curtain, and thus he realizes his own self. He then engages himself in the service of the Lord in his eternal constitutional position, becoming liberated from the conditioned life. All this is executed by the Lord either through His external potency or directly by the internal potency. Thus ends the Bhakti Vedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Nitinamine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. इत्रे में सदसद रूपे प्रतिषिद्धे स्वसंविदा avidyayatmani krite iti tad brahma darshanam. The Prabhupada very interestingly makes axiomatic statements while translating. Prabhupada is very choosy about the words. So Prabhupada translates this particular verse as, whenever a person experiences what? That both the gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self. He experiences this. How? By self-realization. Whenever a person experiences by self-realization that both the gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self, what happens at that time? At that time, he sees himself as well as the Lord. Prabhupada uses this word called experience. Experience in today's world or in the material world itself, experience is very, very important. Today, all of us have a taste for Krishna consciousness because of the experience of Krishna consciousness. Our experience of taking prasadam, our experience of the first kirtan that we all attended, our experience of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra has given us the conviction, has given us the faith in Krishna consciousness. Narada Muni, the greatest acharya in our parampara, when he was 5 years old, he was taken care by his mother. Mother left in the night for milking the cow. At that time, a snake bit the mother and the mother passed away. The mother passed away and Narada was all alone. And Narada and his mother, once before, they served the Paramahamsas at their home. And because Narada Muni served the Paramahamsas at their home, through their association, he learnt the art of spiritual development. And Narada, after his mother died, he said that this is a gift from the Lord. This gift of an opportunity for me to practice spiritual development, where I have no ties with anyone in the material world. And what did Narada do after his mother passed away? He left to the north to practice spiritual life. At that time, he walks through different cities, towns, villages, thick forests. He was completely exhausted before he reached the north. Usually people go to the north to practice. North is where all the pilgrimage sites are there. So he was traveling towards the north, he was exhausted. When he was exhausted, he came across a lake where he took bath, quenched his thirst, and sat under a banyan tree for meditation. The moment he started meditating, as per the instructions of the Paramahamsas he had met at home, the Lord gave him darshan. The Lord gave him darshan, and when he saw the Lord, his hairs were standing on the end. His voice was choked up. He could not speak a word. The feelings of emotions were ecstatic. He was feeling ecstatic in his heart the moment he saw the Lord. And the Lord was as dazzling as the sun. He could not even fully open his eyes. And immediately after that darshan, the Lord vanished. It is described in the Bhagavatam that Narada Muni was on the stage of bhava. Prema Bhakti, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, is the highest stage of devotion. Just one stage below is a stage called Bhava. So Narada Muni had attained that stage, and the experience of the Lord at that stage made him feel ecstatic. And the Lord disappeared. And Narada was trying to experience the Lord once again by meditating again, sitting for meditation again. But this time, the Lord did not appear. The Lord did not appear. And there was an Asharira Vani from the sky. It said, now that I've given you an experience of me, you practice austerity, get rid of all the anarthas, the impurities which are stopping you from attaining me. You practice that spiritual life and you attain me. So the experience that Narada had of the Lord in the beginning of his practice of meditation served as an impetus, a force for him to practice Krishna consciousness throughout his life. And today, Prabhupada, the 32nd Acharya in our parampara, coming down from Narada Muni, has given us a similar kind of an experience in the beginning of Krishna consciousness. Many times we have a tendency to think that it is only intellectual pursuits alone which has gotten us into Krishna consciousness. No, it is the experience and the glimpse of the absolute truth that we have gotten by the mercy of Prabhupada and by the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And that has gotten us into Krishna consciousness. So this experience is a very, very important word. The Lord has to be experienced and not to be intellectually grasped. Krishna consciousness has an intellectual element, is very, very important to understand the science of Krishna consciousness based on logic and reason. But that is a support structure that Prabhupada has given us for us to pursue and stay on the path of Krishna consciousness. But fundamentally, why are we in Krishna consciousness? It is because of the initial experiences that we all had in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, Prabhupada, in the beginning of ISKCON, he introduced chanting, Sankirtana, and introduced Krishna Prasadam. It is that experience which transformed people's heart. Therefore, Prabhupada uses this word, when a person experiences by self-realization, what? That both the gross and the subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self. Then he can attain the absolute truth. So experience of Krishna, experience of absolute truth can only be felt when? Through the words of a spiritual master. By following the transcendental processes, by following the sadhana bhakti process, one can experience the absolute truth. So that is the only way to experience the absolute truth. Further in the purport, Prabhupada describes about how does one attain self-realization. Very, very important point. The difference between self-realization and material illusion is to know that the temporary or illusory impositions of material energy in the shape of gross and subtle bodies are superficial coverings of the self. The coverings take place due to ignorance. Such coverings are never effective in the person of the personality of Godhead. The next statement is very, very important. Prabhupada makes this. Knowing this convincingly is called liberation. Knowing that the gross and subtle body are just material coverings, and knowing this convincingly is called liberation. In other words, if we try to rephrase this sentence and try to understand what Prabhupada is saying, is that the realization of the ignorance that we are in, the realization of the fact that we are under the coverings of material nature, helps you in self-realization. In other words, realization of ignorance is also knowledge. Once, Aristotle is a very famous philosopher, the Greek philosopher. He was proclaimed as a person, as the most wisest person. I'm sorry, not Aristotle, Socrates. He is said to be one of the wisest person in Greece. People used to tell that. There is nobody who is as wise as Socrates. So one of Socrates' friend, he came to Socrates and he said, "My dear Socrates, people call you the wisest man in town." When Socrates heard this, he was a little puzzled. Why are people calling me, I am the wisest man in town? Because he thought to himself that I do not know anything great. So how can I be the wisest? Why are people calling me the wisest? So he wanted to test this, claim. What he did? He went to all the politicians. He went to all the poets, the craftsmen in Greece. He approached all of them and he asked them, and he used to have a dialogue with them. He used to have a discussion with them on politics, on science, on philosophy. Of course, science was not there, philosophy. He used to have a discussion. And over his discussion, he understood two important things. One is that people lived under the illusion of knowledge, under the illusion that I know everything. If I'm a philosopher, I know everything about philosophy. This is an illusion. Second one, Socrates began to understand about his own ignorance. So he made a very interesting statement. The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. That's the only true wisdom. That is the starting point of knowledge. If you see, all our acharyas have adopted this principle. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in a song called Gopinath, you all heard the song? This is from Kalyana Kalpataru. He sings, Gopinath Amito Mara Kebala Matra Tumi Amara Avidya Base Nahi Jani Bhakti Avidya Base Nahi Jani Bhakti Palakar Me Mane Achaya Jarita, which means Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the greatest Acharya in our parampara. He is said to be the savior of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. What is his claim? What is he saying? He is saying, I do not know what is devotion. And my materialistic mind is absorbed in fruit of activity. I have fallen into this dark and perilous worldly existence. What are these? These are not statements of ignorance, but these are statements of realization. Anybody who wants to advance in spiritual life, therefore Prabhupada writes in the purport that one has to realize the ignorance that one is in. Therefore, the realization of ignorance is actually knowledge. Just like Socrates says, the only true wisdom is in knowing that I know nothing. So even in Krishna consciousness, this attitude has to be maintained, that I know nothing. That's why Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne. Vidya should lead to Vinayatha or humility. With Vidya leads to pride, it is called the illusion of knowledge. So with the advancement of Krishna consciousness, there must be change of character of a devotee. He must display the character of humility. He must display the character of respect, being respectful to others. He must display the character of realizations. These are very, very important. So Prabhupada further describes how do we culture this knowledge? How do we culture this transcendental knowledge? Let us try to understand from the purports. Prabhupada describes the impetus for material activity is generated from the self. When, however, one meets the self by proper culture, the activities of the self begin. Please note this word. Prabhupada uses this word called proper culture. What is the meaning of the word culture? People culture or cultivate. Culture is derived from the word called cultivate. We've heard this term, cultivating crops. So when you cultivate crops, does the crop grow in one day? It takes some few months. First you sow the seed, then you put water, you take care of the plants, and then slowly allow it to grow. This is called culturing. So any culture requires time, it requires effort. When one meets the self by proper culture, the activities of the self begin. And further, Prabhupada writes in the purport that by the culture of transcendental knowledge, when the living entity prays to the Lord for deliverance from the clutches of forgetfulness, the Lord, by his causeless mercy, removes the living being's illusory curtain. When? By the proper culture of transcendental knowledge. But how does one cultivate transcendental knowledge? How does one culture transcendental knowledge? We all are in Krishna consciousness. We are trying to practice Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada is expecting us to culture and cultivate transcendental knowledge. How does one do this? What is the process? So, Prabhupada writes in the Ishopanishad on this culture of transcendental knowledge. There is a foundation on which the transcendental knowledge has to be cultured. And what is that foundation? It is mentioned also in the Bhagavad Gita, and Prabhupada quotes that in the Ishopanishad, that one should culture knowledge in the following way. It's very interesting. Because generally in the modern sense, the study of knowledge is called epistemology. In epistemology, knowledge is classified into physical knowledge and metaphysical knowledge. Physical knowledge is the knowledge of objects, people, situations, all of these things, physical knowledge, that which can be seen, that which can be felt. All of this is called physical knowledge. Metaphysical knowledge, on the other hand, are those which are incomprehensible. Like, for example, spirituality. It is considered to be metaphysical knowledge. This is the two classification of knowledge according to epistemology. Now, we generally classify knowledge in these two terms, and we think knowledge is something outside us. We comprehend knowledge from outside sources. But here, Krishna gives a very important and interesting definition of what it means to be knowledge. You'll be surprised to know. Do you know what is the first item of cultivating that knowledge? The first item is that one should become a perfect gentleman and learn to give proper respect to others. This translates to amanitvam in the Bhagavad Gita. That's the first item of knowledge. What is the first item? One should be a perfect gentleman and learn to give proper respect to others. Second one should not pose himself as a religionist simply for name and fame. Very important. One should not become a source of anxiety to others, putting others in anxiety by the actions of his body, by the thoughts of his mind, or by his words. This forms the basis for culturing transcendental knowledge. Look at the character. In other place, in a letter written to one of the devotees in 1968, Prabhupada writes that character is the seat on which Krishna consciousness develops. A characterless person cannot develop Krishna consciousness. So we must gauge our development in Krishna consciousness by the development of these qualities. One should be a gentleman, one should learn to respect others, one should not pose himself as a religionist for name and fame. One should not become a source of anxiety to others by the actions of his body, not only of his body, by the thoughts of his mind or by his words. One should always think of doing good to others. These are the characteristics of a devotee. One should learn forbearance. What is forbearance? Anybody knows what is forbearance? One should learn forbearance even in the face of provocation from others. What is forbearance? No, forbearance means to tolerate. To tolerate. One should tolerate even in the face of provocation. You're driving your two-wheeler. Usually this cars or big SUV vehicles, they'll come and suddenly they'll cut in front of you. You'll become upset. Then you shout at them. So there's an opportunity for provocation. You're getting provoked. One should not get provoked. One should practice on these things. One should search out a bona fide spiritual master who can lead him gradually to the stage of spiritual realization. In order to approach the platform of self-realization, one must follow the regulative principles enjoined in the revealed scriptures. The regulative principles in the revealed scriptures, as described by the spiritual master. In our case, we don't have to search the spiritual master. Prabhupada is already there. And he's given us revealed scriptures. We have to follow the tenets of the revealed scriptures. One should not falsely identify the gross material body. One should not be attached to more than what is required in life for maintenance of the body and the soul. One should develop a liking for residence in a place with a calm and quiet atmosphere favorable for spiritual culture. Like the folk hostel you're all staying in. One should develop a liking for that. These are all very, very important for cultivating transcendental knowledge. Last is very interesting. One should become a scientist or a philosopher and conduct research into spiritual knowledge, recognizing that spiritual knowledge is permanent, whereas material knowledge ends with the death of his body. So anybody who has a scientific temper, a philosophical temper. What is a scientific and a philosophical temper? To seek and love the truth. To live for the truth. This temperament should not be lost. Madhu Pandit Prabhu was like that. Because he had the temperament to understand and seek and love the truth, he stuck to the truth as given by Prabhupada. When the Guru issue came up, he stuck to the truth for his love of truth. The whole ISKCON organization was against him, but he stood against that for the love of truth. These are all the qualities of a devotee. So one has to practice on these things in the association of devotees. One can never consider himself a devotee without cultivating this knowledge. And Prabhupada writes, these items combine to form a gradual process by which real knowledge can be developed. Real knowledge can only be developed by all of these items when combined. They form a gradual process by which one can develop this knowledge. So one may say that, Prabhu, these are all very difficult to follow. This character and all is too far for me to, develop. What do I do? How do I culture this knowledge? Correct? So, that's why In Kali Yuga, to develop all these things are very difficult. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in his discussion with Ramananda Raya, gives a solution. You know what is that solution? He says, Sthane sthita shrutigatam tanuman manobhi. Whatever position you are there, be in that position. But hear from transcendental sources like Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam. When you hear from transcendental sources, it's a transformation of heart. All of these qualities develop in a devotee automatically when he hears the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam from transcendental sources. And that is the way of development of Krishna consciousness. So therefore, Prabhupada writes in the purport that it's very, very important to cultivate this knowledge, the transcendental knowledge. And Prabhupada makes very interesting conclusion. Anybody who has cultured transcendental knowledge, you see the statement, I will read the statement again for all of you. In the purport, Prabhupada writes, by culture of transcendental knowledge, when the living being prays, you see this, when the living being prays to the Lord for deliverance from the clutches of forgetfulness. Usually, when do you pray? We see a lot of people going to temple. What do they pray generally in the temple? For their success in whatever field they are pursuing, isn't it? They go to the temple and pray for that. You know why? They feel that they are not successful, they want success in life, therefore they approach the Lord. Similarly, by the culture of transcendental knowledge, the devotee begins to realize that I am in absolute ignorance. And realization of ignorance, as discussed, is actually knowledge, is one of the items of knowledge. And anybody who is situated in knowledge, he prays to the Lord. Oh Lord, please bless me so that I come out of this ignorance. So if one has to sincerely pray to the Lord, one needs to culture transcendental knowledge. And what is this transcendental knowledge? Transcendental knowledge is the knowledge which is described in the Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter. Krishna describes, one should know who the absolute truth is. What is our position with respect to the absolute truth? What is this material world? How the Lord is not different, at the same time He is same as the material energy, at the same time is different. Achintya Beda Bedatatva. All of these aspects are there in Prabhupada's purports. And anybody who is convinced about all these things, he is supposed to be situated in knowledge, transcendental knowledge. And one has to culture this transcendental knowledge by hearing, as described by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam. So it is very, very important to cultivate all these things. And one more important principle that is described in the Bhagavatam is that generally we tend to have aversion for any other knowledge in the material world. But there is a verse in the Bhagavatam which describes about what to do with the knowledge of the material world. Some may be very good at science, some may be very good at philosophy, some may be very good at arts, some may be very good at engineering, some may be very good doctors, poets. What do we do with all this knowledge? I have cultivated this knowledge from my childhood. Bhagavatam has a solution for that. He says, idam hi pumsas tapasas shrutasya svishtasya sutasya buddhi dattayoho avichito artha kavibir nirupito yaduttama shlok punanu varnanam. The translation of this is, learned circles have positively concluded that the infallible purpose of advancement of knowledge, namely austerities, study of the Vedas, sacrifices, chanting of hymns and charity, culminates in transcendental descriptions of the Lord who is defined in choice poetry. In other words, all the austerities that we do, all the study of Vedas that we do, all the chantings that one does, the charity one does, should culminate in glorifying the Supreme Lord. In the purport, Prabhupada writes his realizations. Very interesting. He says, human intellect is developed for advanced learning of art, science, philosophy, physics, chemistry, psychology, economics, politics, etc. And Prabhupada makes the next interesting statement. He says, by culture of such knowledge, what is that knowledge? Physics, chemistry, poetry, arts. By culture of such knowledge, the human society can attain perfection of life. But this perfection of life should culminate. And what is that perfection of life? It should culminate in the realization of the Supreme Being, Vishnu. If the knowledge of physics, chemistry and mathematics, whatever we have, if it does not culminate in understanding Vishnu, it is materialistic knowledge. That is why Jiva Goswami writes, Prapanchikataya buddhya hari sambandha vastunaha mumukshuvir parityago palgu vairagyam katyate. Anybody who thinks that this material world and all the things associated with the material world is prapanchikataya, it's like, material. He does not see the hari sambandha with the material world. And he renounces that. He is called as a palgu vairagi. It's called as a palgu vairagi. Acharyas in our parampara have stood as a testimony for the statement. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur earned his title called Siddhanta Saraswati because of his study of Surya Siddhanta. Surya Siddhanta is the Vedic astronomy. It studies the position, the location of planets. It also studies the distance of the sun with various planets. And what did Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur do? He did a comparative study between modern astronomy and Vedic astronomy. And he corroborated and he said how Vedic astronomy and modern astronomy are same. And then he glorified the Lord. The Vedas are coming from the Lord and the Vedic astronomy is as scientific as the modern astronomy. That's glorification of the Lord. He never rejected Surya Siddhanta as material. So this attitude and the scientific temper should never be lost for a devotee, for a good practitioner of Krishna consciousness. You should have that scientific temper, the scientific acumen, if you have developed from your childhood, dovetail that in glorifying the Lord. That's the way. If somebody is good at art, painting, understand the symmetry in nature, the beauty in nature, and understand that the beauty in nature is originally coming from the beauty in the Lord. That's the way of developing Krishna consciousness, culturing transcendental knowledge. So Prabhupada writes in the purport, the Shruti therefore directs that those who are actually advanced in learning should aspire for the service of the Lord. When advancement of knowledge is applied in the service of the Lord, the whole process becomes absolute. Advancement of knowledge, the knowledge of physics, chemistry, all those, when it's applied in the service of the Lord, the whole process becomes absolute. Therefore, Prabhupada dovetailed every talent who came to ISKCON. Somebody is good at management, dovetail him in Krishna service. Somebody is good at art, dovetail him in Krishna service. Somebody is a scientist, do scientific research for Krishna. You see the Acharya's realizations, how important it is, and how Prabhupada so beautifully engaged all of us in Krishna's service. Therefore, in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it is described what is a spiritual master's duty with respect to sadhana bhakti. So the answer which Rupa Goswami gives is very interesting. He says, the spiritual master finds ways and means to engage the devotee's mind on Krishna. So somebody is coming with the talent, Prabhupada knows how to engage. And Prabhupada engaged. All the sages and devotees of the Lord have recommended that the subject matter of art, science, philosophy, physics, chemistry, psychology, and all other branches of knowledge should be wholly and solely applied in the service of the Lord. Somebody is very good at technology. Apply that in the service of the Lord. We should never reject it as material. Science and philosophy also should be applied in the service of the Lord. There is no use presenting dry speculative theories for sense gratification. Philosophy and science should be engaged to establish the glory of the Lord. Advanced people who are eager to understand the absolute truth through the medium of science. And therefore, a great scientist should endeavor to prove the existence of the Lord on a scientific basis. Similarly, philosophical speculations should be utilized to establish the supreme truth as sentient and all-powerful. All branches of knowledge, similarly, should always be engaged in the service of the Lord. So this idea of who Krishna is, we have to learn from the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. We know from the Shastras that Krishna is great, but we cannot apply our estimation of greatness on Krishna, because Krishna is infinitely great. But what is the meaning of infinitely great Krishna? We cannot comprehend. Therefore, comprehension of Krishna on our platform is not possible. Then how do you comprehend Krishna? Ata Shri Krishna Dina Bhave Gayam Indriyaihi. Through Indriyas we cannot understand Krishna. Sevon Mukehi Jivvado. It is only by chanting the holy names of Krishna one can begin to realize who Krishna is. Otherwise, to understand and put effort to comprehend the greatness of Krishna, we cannot. Because our estimation of who great is, when you tell the greatest people, who comes to your mind? Naturally, when you ask people, what comes to your mind? Some great guy. Krishna is multiple times greater. No, he is infinitely greater. What is infinite greater? We don't know. So, the advancement of transcendental knowledge begins from ignorance of what we don't know. That's humility. Vidya should put us on that platform. If Vidya is not putting us on that platform, we are flying high, then actually we are in the illusion of knowledge. Therefore, if a devotee has to be grounded in Krishna consciousness, he must have realizations, or like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that's the starting point of knowledge. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is representing all of us, and he's speaking. He is singing Gopinath, I don't know Bhakti. But he's writing books on Bhakti, because that is his realization. When Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami writes that I'm lower than the worm in the stool, it is not simply some metaphorical statement. He actually feels that he's lower than the worm in the stool. It's a realization. It's a statement of realization. So, Krishna consciousness has to be practiced in the right spirit. Now, with respect to the spirit of Krishna consciousness, I think I'll just take 5 more minutes. Very interestingly, the whole science of this acting in Krishna consciousness is described in the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna asks Krishna, because in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Estvatmartireva syat atmatriptascha manavaha. What is that verse? Estvatmartireva syat atmatriptascha manavaha tasya karyam ne vidyate. That's how it ends. That is chapter 3, verse 18, if I'm right. Verse 17. Estvatmartireva syat atmatriptascha manavaha Atmannevatmana santushta tasya karyam ne vidyate. One who is situated in knowledge of what? Of the self, and illumined in the self, who rejoices in and is satisfied with the self, he has no duties to perform. So Arjuna was thinking, anybody who is in knowledge, he has no duties to perform. Okay? But later in the 4th chapter, Krishna says that all types of sacrifices that you do, all different types of yajnas that you do, everything, culminates to knowledge. So Arjuna is telling, if one who is situated in knowledge has no duties to perform, and all sacrifices that you do culminates in knowledge, then I have no duty to perform. It's a natural conclusion, isn't it? But at the end of 4th chapter, Krishna is motivating Arjuna to fight. So Arjuna is confused. Krishna, you are telling one who is situated in knowledge has no duties to perform. And by sacrifice, I will come to knowledge. And now you are telling me to fight. That means you are telling me not to be in knowledge. You are telling me to ignorant. So to answer that, Krishna describes the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. In Sanskrit, this chapter is called Karma Sannyasa Yoga. A person who's performing work can also be a sannyasi. How? That is the science. That science is what is to be understood in the Bhagavad Gita. This particular chapter talks about the spirit of service. If your spirit and motivation of service is material, then we will remain in material consciousness. It must be not material, but it must be devotional. So these are all fine philosophical aspects that one has to understand from the Bhagavad Gita. So I'll just read a few important quotes from this particular statement and then from this particular chapter, and we'll end with that. So Arjuna asked this question, my dear Krishna, you recommend, first of all, you asked me to renounce work. And then again you recommend work with devotion. Okay? He's telling me to renounce work because anybody who's in knowledge will renounce work. But now you're telling me to do work again. Why? So Krishna says that renunciation of work and work in devotion, both are good for liberation. But between the two, work and devotion is better. So then he writes, activities performed, Prabhupada writes in the purport, activities, any activity, as an art, science, philosopher, physics, chemistry, whatever activity you're performing, activities performed in full knowledge of what? Of Krishna's position, who we are, activities which are performed in full knowledge strengthens one's advancement in real knowledge. So any activity that we all perform in the temple for the pleasure of the deities, for the pleasure of Guru, should be performed in full knowledge as presented by Prabhupada in his books. That will help us advance in real knowledge. One can blindly perform service. Correct? Just like we also have employees in our temple. Employees also perform service, but they don't advance in real knowledge. Devotees advance. Why? They are in full knowledge of what they are doing. Without Krishna consciousness, mere renunciation of fruitive activities does not actually purify the heart of a conditioned soul. Renunciation is complete when it is in knowledge. You see the importance of knowledge. Knowledge that everything in existence belongs to the Lord and that no one should claim proprietorship over anything. How is the Lord, how everything belongs to the Lord? That you should know by hearing lectures, by hearing Bhagavatam. If this realization is not there, we are nowhere advancing in real knowledge. So these are all very, very important art of performing work. One who knows that everything is Krishna's property is always situated in renunciation. Knowledge that one is in quality, is one in quality yet different in quantity, is correct transcendental knowledge. This leads one to become full in himself, having nothing to aspire or lament. There is no duality in his mind. Detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna are one and the same. Very simple but very profound statements. Detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna. So in Krishna consciousness, one has to learn to get attached to Krishna. And how does one get attached to Krishna? Primarily by following the sadhana bhakti as given by Prabhupada. And one develops attachment to Krishna by the process of chanting, by the process of deity worship, by the process of hearing the Bhagavatam. One develops attachment to Krishna. Then what happens? Then we can dovetail all our abilities in the service of Krishna. So the focus for a Krishna conscious devotee is to develop attachment towards the Lord, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this Kali Yuga has given us a very sublime process to get attached to Krishna, and that is by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra one can get attached to Krishna. And when you get attached to Krishna, detachment from matter is automatic. So therefore, as practitioners of Krishna consciousness, it is very, very important to follow the sadhana bhakti, especially the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, without which development in Krishna consciousness is not possible. Dovetailing all our talents, not possible. Correct? We will discuss further on these points in the upcoming class. With this, we'll stop here. Any doubts anybody has? Any questions? Okay, there are no questions. We'll stop here. Shrimad Bhagavatam ki, Jagat Guru Shri Prabhupada ki, Thai Gaur Premanande.